May 3, 1945, just days before World War II ends in Europe, and the SS Arcona sits anchored in Lübeck Bay in the Baltic Sea, packed with over 4,500 concentration camp prisoners. The Nazis have loaded survivors from evacuated camps onto this former luxury liner and two other ships, claiming they're being transported to safety. But there's no food, no water, and conditions are horrific. Then, at 3 p.m., British Royal Air Force Typhoon fighters appear overhead. The pilots have been told the ships contain fleeing SS officers and U-boat crews. They don't know the ships are filled with concentration camp survivors. The Typhoons attack with rockets and cannon fire. The Arcona erupts in flames. Prisoners trapped below decks scream as fire spreads. Some jump into the freezing Baltic, others burn alive in the holds. By the time the fires die down, approximately 5,000 concentration camp survivors are dead, killed not by the Nazis who imprisoned them, but by Allied forces who thought they were attacking the enemy. The Arcona disaster becomes one of the worst friendly fire and maritime disasters in history, a cruel tragedy in the final week of the war. The SS Arcona is a German luxury ocean liner built in 1927. For years before the war, it carried passengers on luxury cruises to South America. The ship is 676 feet long, weighing 27,000 tons, designed to carry about 1,300 passengers and crew in comfort. It's considered one of the most beautiful ships in the German merchant fleet. When World War II begins, the ship is converted for military use. It serves as a floating barracks and later as a transport ship in the Baltic Sea. By 1945, as Germany collapses and Soviet forces advance from the east, the ship is pressed into a final horrific use. In April 1945, Soviet forces are rapidly advancing through northern Germany toward the Baltic coast. The Nazis begin evacuating concentration camps in the east to prevent prisoners from being liberated by Soviet troops. This evacuation involves death marches and transport by ship. Tens of thousands of prisoners, already weakened by years of starvation, disease, and forced labor, are forced to march hundreds of kilometers or are packed onto ships. The concentration camp at Neuengamme, near Hamburg, held approximately 50,000 prisoners. As Allied forces close in, the SS begins evacuating the camp. Thousands of prisoners are forced onto trains and marched toward the coast. The stated plan is to load them onto ships in Lübeck Bay, but there's evidence the Nazis have no intention of actually transporting these prisoners to safety. Instead, documents suggest a plan to load prisoners onto ships, take the ships to sea, and sink them, eliminating witnesses to Nazi crimes before the war ends. Whether this plan was official policy or the initiative of local SS commanders remains debated, but the ships are prepared in a way that suggests mass murder was intended.
3 ships are gathered in Lübeck Bay. SS Arcona, the largest, a former luxury liner. SS Thielbeck, a smaller freighter. SS Deutschland, another passenger ship, later evacuated before the attack. Starting on April 26, 1945, concentration camp prisoners begin arriving at the docks in Lübeck. They're loaded onto the Arcona and Thielbeck under terrible conditions. The ships are not prepared for passengers. There are no facilities, no food provisions, no medical care. Prisoners are simply packed into holds and compartments. Over 4,500 prisoners are forced onto the Arcona alone. The Thielbeck holds approximately 2,800. These prisoners come from camps throughout northern Germany. They include political prisoners, resistance fighters, Jews, Soviet prisoners of war, and people from dozens of nationalities. Many are barely alive after years in camps and the recent death marches. Meanwhile, British forces are advancing toward Lübeck from the west. The British Second Army is pushing through northern Germany, racing to reach the Baltic before Soviet forces. British intelligence knows that German military units and Nazi officials are attempting to escape by sea from ports on the Baltic coast. The RAF receives reports that ships in Lübeck Bay are being used to evacuate SS officers, Nazi officials, and German military personnel. Some reports suggest U-boat crews are aboard. The RAF is ordered to attack German shipping in the Baltic to prevent escapes. On May 3, 1945, just 5 days before Germany's unconditional surrender, British intelligence identifies 3 ships in Lübeck Bay: Arcona, Thielbeck, and Deutschland. The RAF classifies them as legitimate military targets carrying enemy military personnel attempting to escape. What the British don't know, or what intelligence fails to communicate to the pilots, is that these ships are filled with concentration camp prisoners. Some sources suggest the International Red Cross attempted to warn the British about the prisoners, but this warning either didn't reach the right people or wasn't believed. The confusion of the war's final days means critical information doesn't get to those who need it. At approximately 3 p.m. on May 3rd, RAF Typhoon fighter bombers from 2nd Tactical Air Force approach Lubeck Bay. The pilots have been briefed that the ships contain enemy military personnel. They prepare to attack. The Typhoons are armed with rockets and 20mm cannons. They're highly effective anti-ship weapons. The pilots can see the 3 large ships anchored in the bay, clear targets against the blue water. The attack begins. Typhoons dive on the Cap Arcona, firing rockets. The first rockets strike the ship's superstructure, causing explosions and immediate fires. The pilots make multiple passes, firing rockets and cannon rounds. The Cap Arcona, a civilian ship with no armor, is defenseless, helpless. Rockets penetrate the hull and explode inside the ship. Fires break out across multiple decks. The ship had been used as a barracks and contained wooden bunks, bedding, and other flammable materials. The fires spread rapidly. Prisoners trapped below decks face a terrible choice: stay and burn, or jump into the Baltic Sea. The water temperature is approximately 7 to 8 degrees Celsius, 45 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to cause hypothermia and death within minutes. Hundreds of prisoners jump from the burning ship into the water. Some can swim, most cannot. They're already weakened from years of starvation and abuse. The cold water quickly saps their strength. Many drown within minutes. Others cling to debris, trying to stay afloat. The Typhoons also attacked the Tealbeck. This smaller ship suffers similar damage. Fires break out, and the ship begins to sink. Prisoners on board face the same terrible choices: burn or jump into the freezing water. The Deutschland, which had been anchored nearby, is attacked but manages to escape toward shore and beach itself. Many prisoners on board survive because the ship reaches shallow water before sinking. But the Cap Arcona and Tealbeck are farther from shore.
Total deaths, approximately 7,000 to 7,500 people. When British forces reach Lubeck and the surrounding area in the following days, they discover what happened. Survivors tell them the ships were full of concentration camp prisoners. The realization hits: the RAF has killed thousands of concentration camp survivors in a friendly fire incident. There's also evidence suggesting the SS deliberately created this situation. By loading concentration camp prisoners onto ships that might be targeted by Allied forces, they could eliminate witnesses to their crimes, while claiming the Allies were responsible for the deaths. Some historians believe this was intentional, a final act of murder disguised as a military operation. The surviving prisoners are liberated by British forces. They're in terrible condition, starved, sick, traumatized by years in camps, and now traumatized further by surviving the ship attack. Many require extensive medical treatment. Some never fully recover physically or psychologically. The disaster receives limited coverage at the time. The war in Europe ends on May 8th, just 5 days after the Cap Arcona attack. News of Germany's surrender dominates media coverage. The liberation of concentration camps and discovery of the full scale of the Holocaust overshadows this particular tragedy. In the decades since, the Cap Arcona disaster has remained relatively unknown compared to other World War II tragedies. Memorials have been erected in Germany to commemorate the victims. The town of Neustadt in Holstein, near where the disaster occurred, maintains a memorial and holds annual remembrance ceremonies. The disaster raises profound ethical and historical questions. The prisoners aboard the Cap Arcona survived Nazi persecution, survived concentration camps, survived death marches, only to be killed by the forces that were supposed to liberate them. The cruel irony is overwhelming. They died in the final week of the war, killed by their would-be rescuers. The incident also demonstrates the chaos and tragedy of total war. In the final days, with systems breaking down, communication failing, and desperate people making desperate decisions, catastrophic errors become almost inevitable. The pilots who attacked the ships believed they were striking enemy targets. They followed orders based on the intelligence available. They couldn't know the truth. Yet, the truth is that approximately 7,000 concentration camp survivors died because of inadequate intelligence, communication failures, and possibly deliberate Nazi manipulation to create exactly this situation. The Cap Arcona lies at the bottom of Lübeck Bay, a war grave containing thousands of bodies that were never recovered. The wreck has been partially salvaged over the years, but much remains on the seabed. It's protected as a memorial site. The disaster serves as a tragic reminder of war's indiscriminate cruelty, of how even liberation can bring death, and of how the chaos of conflict can turn rescue into massacre. 7,000 people who had survived the Holocaust died within sight of freedom, killed not by their persecutors, but by those who came to save them.